Alright, continuing with our reading of Dallas Pimiento, Book 2, I'm Bronco 2. Beginning with a piece called Wicked Trough. "Whose goat are you?" Necrosanct asked as Pantop walked by. What impertinence, was Pantop's first thought. That this decadent stranger should address him at all was to him most rude. Then, beyond that, the question itself was unseemly. "My own," was Pantop's unspoken reply. He wouldn't bother replying out loud. Pantop took another step or two after the question had been asked. He had just stopped himself from turning to look at Necrosanct when he stumbled into a trough that he was in later days to describe to friends as wicked. He managed to keep from dirtying his clothes too much as he fell down to the bottom of the trough, but this disturbance of his appearance was still the uppermost concern in his mind as he angrily got to his feet. "I blame that decadent bastard," he said to himself. He blamed himself just as much, but he was too angry to admit it. This anger evaporated from a scalding bath he had immersed himself in to a heavy cloud over his head as he looked for a way out of the trough. "No way out, is there?" Necrosanct's head appeared over the summit. "I suppose not," Pantop emphasized each syllable and swung his horned head 1, 2, 3 times back and forth like a sassy metronome. "I'll try to find a rope," Necrosanct called down. "Or a leash," he added as he disappeared. "Don't bother," Pantop said. He repeated this louder. "Don't bother." He began to walk down the length of the trough in the direction he had been walking before he fell. He had been heading into town to the Tin Can, a coffee shop and reading room catering to goats especially, though members of most other species were welcome. Obviously neither the owners nor the patrons wanted flies or fleas inside. You can argue all you want for insect inclusion, thought Pantop as he picked his way along the narrow, trash-strewn path. But at the end of the day, there's still nothing but pests. He immediately countered his own deepest wish, the extermination of all insect life, as he usually did every observation he made, being his own devil's advocate, by asking himself how the flowers would get pollinated, or how the scavenger work the insects did would get done. When he started to sense after 20 minutes or so that the path was veering away from downtown, he asked himself whether he shouldn't have accepted Necrosanct's help. Amusement for the little sloppies. The theater was small. It only held about 50 seats, but no expense had been spared to ensure that those seats were comfortable. They were deep, widely spaced from each other, and set in an auditorium painted completely black. The children, whom Ray called the little sloppies, filed in without unnecessary noise and took their seats. After they were all in place, there were seats enough left over for Ray, Miss Barretto, and 7 others, should 7 others wish to sit through a showing of The Kelloid. The theater didn't just show films. There was a short stage upon which a thin man in his late 20s now stood. He was dressed, if not precisely as a clown, then certainly as someone on whom a clown's character might be based. He looked, as Joe, the most originally perceptive of the children, said, like a rich hobo. "Invert those syllables and you have boho," Monica intoned gravely. Joe realized that was supposed to mean something, but as perceptive as he might be, he had not yet been exposed to a wide enough range of influences to get her reference. That would have to wait until his teens. "Boys and girls," cried the man on the stage, "how many of you know what this is?" He drew out a yo-yo from his pocket. "Oh, God," Ray muttered. Several children shouted out the answer. 1 or 2 made fart noises with their lips or underarms during the response. "That's right. How many of you think I can make this yo-yo levitate over my head?" The man waited as the children either held up their hands or shouted out, "I do," or "I don't," as was their wont. Who knows what levitate means? "Just show the film," Ray whined through his clenched teeth. "It'll be over with in a minute," Miss Barretto assured him. After the yo-yo trick was finished, the performer told a joke or two as he made an elephant out of balloons. Ah, balloon folding, very good. This'll be on his loan application, I presume. Ray leaned over to Miss Beretta and whispered. The young lady did not reply. Ray leaned back and stared at his hands until the film began. He was delighted to see that the children had tired of Mr. Yo-Yo not long after he had. The film, a black and white would-be horror movie done in the documentary style, had been a favorite of Ray's for years. He glanced around at the children. They were becoming restless. The little sloppies don't get it, he thought contemptuously. Love sink in the vandal operation. Beneath Clamdigger's Cathedral was an underground complex in which the Vandal Bean Company, a subsidiary of Vagary Church which owned the cathedral, had set up a semi-secret research lab. I say semi-secret because even though the workings and projects of the lab were secret, several of the Tomatoville residents worked there. Young Albert, for instance, worked as a janitor at the facility, descending each day from a door just outside the cathedral itself to his post, but he could not say with any precision exactly what went on there. All he knew was that he was required to sweep up the floors, take out the trash, wash various items, and occasionally to help move certain things, the nature of which was seldom explained to him, and even then without any detail. Still, he told his mother one Saturday morning as he ate breakfast at the family table around which were gathered his parents and younger siblings, Mr. Kircham is nice. He's a good man. "What are you going to do today?" Albert's father asked him. The older man hunched over his food like a dog protecting its supper dish. He spoke through a mouthful of eggs and toast. "I'm going to Oakroton," Albert said matter-of-factly. There has to be one word that handily replaces that cumbersome phrase. He feared his father's comments. Rightly so, for the egg and toast either responded, "Always got to be on the road, don't you?" A piece of egg escaped the black hole of his mouth. Albert said nothing. He had made his plans, and he wasn't going to change them. Within the hour he was on his way to Oakroton, the second of the 3 towns, including Tomatoville, in the area known as the Map Zone. The third was Corn City, but we aren't going to examine that town today. Nor are we going to examine Oakroton, because instead of following Albert to Oakroton, we are going to peek into the Saturday doings at the Vandal Bean Company's subterranean lab. Norris Richter, a shadowy inspector from the corporate headquarters, was paying a visit. The weekend crew, composed mostly of temps and junior-level staff, were showing him around and explaining things. When Richter came to janitor's closet B3, he peered into the sink. "Not very hygienic, is it?" he sniffed. "That's Albert's fault, sir," said someone. "He's a sloppy shirker." The near-beer of roadside commerce. As Albert drove into Oakroton, he passed a roadside stand that sold tacos and a watery beer of local manufacturer known as Morton. At this stand stood two middle-aged gentlemen named Travis and Troy. Their hats were tilted back on their heads. Each smiled at the other as they bit into their tacos and sipped their Morton. "La Grazia," read Travis off the label of the bottle he held. "Is that a local brand?" Troy asked the man behind the counter. "Yes, sir. Brewed right here in Oakroton." The man turned from looking at the field of tall grass across the road to Troy. "Well, you're not actually in Oakroton here," Troy pointed out. "The city limits aren't for another couple of miles." "Troy," Travis admonished his friend. "We consider this Oakroton," the counterman explained. "But in truth, I don't actually live inside Oakroton. I live off Boglag Road." He waved his hand over his head, pointing somewhere behind him. "You the owner?" Travis asked. "No, but I manage the place." Troy nodded. He was finished eating, and he had had enough small talk with this stranger. He pushed his hat down on his head and stepped out into the sun. Travis said, "See you," to the manager of the stand, though in fact he probably never would see the man again, and followed his friend. They got into a long 20-year-old automobile, Travis driving, and headed the same way Albert did 10 minutes later. Less than a mile after passing the city limits sign, they were held up in traffic. "It's an accident," said Troy. "Must have just happened," said Travis. Albert had smashed his car into the back of another car belonging to an older woman. He wasn't hurt to any great extent, though he wished he had been. "I wished I'd had my foot cut off," he said to himself as he waited by his car for the police to arrive. "Cleanly, and so quickly that it wouldn't have hurt," he added. The woman whose car he had struck sat moaning and rubbing the back of her neck. She's faking, Albert hoped viciously. As Travis and Troy finally drove by the scene, an ambulance had arrived to take the woman to the hospital. He drank the steaming inadequacy. "Take your time," whispered a helpful sprite in Dallas Pimento's ear. "No. Barrel ahead," countered an opposing but equally helpful sprite. Pimiento sat inundated by banana fumes, staring at a piece of paper on a drawing board. His greatest secret, and secret shame, was that in addition to his painting, Pimiento also drew cartoons. Or comics. He never knew exactly what term to use in reference to this work. He couldn't stop himself. He knew he should be using all his available time to paint, but somehow these confused and confusing little doodles obsessed him. In the past, when he had a job, he could claim his breaks and lunches as legitimate venues for the cartooning. Obviously, he couldn't paint at work, but now that the job was history, literally in certain well-documented instances, what was his excuse? For all his doubts, he refused to approach this secondary work in anything less than a fully committed, deeply aesthetic mindset. No matter how shitty the results might look to a connoisseur of comics, either mainstream or underground. There was something from his childhood that he was trying to recapture, to express. If he could get a grasp on what it was, he might be able to render it. On the other hand, a clear view of what he was aiming for might dispel the magic of its attraction. It was these two ideas that the sprites, Lamar and Joey, represented. But which one was attached to which idea? Did it matter? Of course not, thought Pimiento. He found satisfaction in many of the drawings he did, no matter how difficult their births. He had dropped the search for meaning within them, or anything else really, long ago. Pure aesthetic relief is what he sought. Since coming to Tomatoville and taking up this new life, he had made the decision to sign his artworks with the name Bronco. This was both a rejection of his past with its niggardly engagement and its profoundly vacillating timidity, as well as a rejection of his given name, which he had always hated. Dallas, a city in Texas. It made him sound like a would-be cowboy or a hick. Pimiento, what a horrible name. Why hadn't his grandfather changed it when he emigrated to America from the family's homeland? Unreasoning pride, that's why. Pimento's rejection of all this was his source of pride, that and the work he did. He didn't feel he had the right to change his given name, though, for all his aggressive iconoclasty, if that's not the right word, it should be. However, he felt privileged to sign the Bronco name to his wretched, illegible cartoons. Submission to horn-rimmed delicacy. Pimiento took to wearing horn-rimmed glasses in public. These were the black kind, sported by John Lennon before his adoption of the granny glasses. Of course, others wore them as well, which Weiss observed to Ned Feast, a friend of his, as they sat outside the Poppy Seed, a coffee shop within walking distance of their houses. There was Michael Caine in A Funeral in Berlin, and there was... You can't think of anybody else, can you? Feast smirked. Yeah, I can. Weiss snapped his fingers. One of the two guys in Peter and Gordon. Which one? Feast sipped his coffee and craned his head to see if Dallas Pimiento was still visible down the street. I don't know. I don't know which was which. I don't either. I don't even know. Wait, I neither? That's the proper word. I don't know either. You wouldn't say me don't know either. But you said I neither, not I either. Sounds better. Must be some reason for saying I neither instead of I either. Yeah, but if you're going by what sounds better, you'd say me neither, protested Weiss. It only sounds better because you're not used to the proper construction. Feast thought that this was also a good argument against belief in God, but he didn't bring that up because he didn't want to start something with Weiss, who was a regular churchgoer. I'll have to look that up when I get home. Weiss finished his tea and loudly dropped his spoon into the cup. You do that. I will. Can you think of anybody else who wore those glasses? Feast asked. Not really. I wanted to say more movie stars' names, but if they wore them, it was generally only in a movie, not habitually. Cary Grant, Feast said casually. Cary Grant, Weiss shouted, as if the name had been a swear word. That's the very one. Wouldn't it be funny, mused Feast, if people said Cary Grant instead of Jesus Christ? Lord Ivy League creation. Many were the tales passed around about Lord Ivy League. Everyone knew that he was a fashion designer. That much was an obvious fact. His clothes had been worn by the intellectual class for years. Who was he really, though? That was what those who had heard the various stories with a skeptical ear wanted to know. So, Susie Ohio began her interview of the great man. Lord Ivy League isn't your real name, is it? It is now. The Lord's right leg was crossed over his left, the ankle resting elegantly on the knee. A 2.5-inch length of burgundy sock exposed between the narrow-cut gray gabardine of the slacks and the black alligator hide of the loafers. On top of his ankle, the Lord rested a surprisingly beefy hand, one not too hairy, and sporting a rather plain silver watch with a black leather band. Other than this functional piece, the Lord was always punctual. He wore no jewelry, not even cufflinks or a tie clip. What is your birth name? Miss Ohio begged. Lord Ivy League's handsome face was smiling. He was confident and relaxed enough to smile with his whole countenance. Even his white comb-over seemed to be adding to his expression of mirth. I'd rather not say, the Lord laughed. Is it that awful? No, not really, he mused. It's just that name doesn't represent who I am today. The person who went by that name dressed in jeans. A terrible to behold flash of violence stirred deep within the pale blue eyes. Miss Ohio noted this, but pressed on. She had interviewed many men far more dangerous in her time. No, you used to wear jeans, she laughed. And T-shirts with slogans on them, Lord Ivy League joined the woman in her laugh. So how did you change, and why? The Lord took a deep breath. He turned his gaze into the high opposite corner of the room. What scenes of regret did he see? What journalistic dynamite might he set the torch of revelation to? I decided that I didn't like that person, he answered simply, and I didn't like the era into which that person had been born. Miss Ohio scratched her pen down the page on her notebook. Boiled egg breath. He has boiled egg breath, Annie described Pantop to her friend Gomera as the exhausted goat limped into the tin can. Has he? Gomera followed Pantop with her eyes as he nearly fell into a chair 2 tables away. How do you know? I've seen him around. He was at the Honeybun Awards ceremony last year. The 2 females watched Pantop as he ordered a tall drink and picked up a leaflet at random from the pile on his table. They could not hear what was said, however, when a dubious-looking fellow in the habit of a horse moved from a seat near the back of the place to join Pantop at his table. You're late, the stranger growled. I'm sorry, Pantop gasped. He signaled the wait person for another drink. I mean really late. I fell into a trough, Pantop began to explain. A trough? The stranger took the leaflet out of Pantop's grasp. What are you reading? Yes, a trough, and I couldn't get out. I had to walk along it until it leveled out, and by that time I was out near the rail yard. I didn't know this town had a rail yard. Kinetic Forces of Planetary Movement. The stranger read aloud the title of the skimpy, cheaply printed leaflet. He sounded like Jack Lord. Yes, so anyway, that's why I'm late. Pantop accepted his new drink and put half of it down his throat at once. You're lucky I'm still here, the stranger informed Pantop bluntly. Look, I am sorry. I've told you that. I very much want us to conclude our business as arranged. He paused. What was he about to say next? What he was about to say next was a lie. But if you choose to go elsewhere, I will understand. Don't be silly, the other character tossed the leaflet back onto the tabletop. It's just that I've been sitting here thinking about all the other people I could have reached in the past hour who would be just as eager to obtain this property. Not as eager as I, the unnamed fellow mused. Eager to pay a little extra, he asked. So what does he do, Gomera asked Annie. He's a theater producer, I think, said Annie. Memorandum of the Kismop. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The Kismop building was empty of people. It remained that way until about 3 a.m, when Vol Stoddard and Dud Wild crept in through the basement. The 2 young men who worked for Kismop during the day made their way up to the 7th floor. That memo was here somewhere, Stoddard said as he dug through the papers on a desk that was not his. Maybe the cleaning crew threw it away, Wild suggested. He looked about nervously. The silence and emptiness of the building made him afraid. No, Stoddard shook his head. He didn't have it in the wastepaper basket. Maybe it was on his desk and they threw it away anyway. Stoddard glanced at Wild irritably. You're fantasizing, he snapped. The cleaners don't do stuff like that. They'd get fired. Not for throwing away something that's not supposed to exist, Wild hissed. It does exist. I saw it. Stoddard took a breath. I'm not going to argue about this. It's pointless. He jerked open drawers and rambled amid the items inside. The damn fool doesn't even lock his desk. Maybe he doesn't think he has anything to hide. Boy, I sure do. I'm always conscientious about locking my desk. Stoddard looked about at the various papers and photos pinned to the textile-covered walls of the cubicle. If you can't find it, you can't find it. I wouldn't worry about it. Walt was crouched now beside the chair in which Stoddard sat. Look at this. Stoddard pulled a small photo off the wall, tearing it through the push button that held it. Is that his kid? He showed the picture to Walt. I don't know. I don't know him that well. I think it is. I think he has a kid. Stoddard tore the photo in half. What are you doing? Walt demanded. Now he'll know someone was here going through his stuff. To hell with him. If he's going to piss me off by taking that memo with him, then he deserves it. Stoddard had intended to leave the pieces of the photo on the desk, but thinking better of it, put them in his pocket. Alright, we will continue next weekend. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.